This week we're talking about magic, and obviously the word magic today seems like kind of a weird, funny, entertaining form of activity. Kind of cheesy, I guess, like this guy over here with the fancy bow tie and spooky eyeballs and stuff like that. Magic is kind of this weird word that has been used left and right and kind of thrown around to look like as much this guy in a tuxedo, as much as a wizard in a long beard and a big cloak, as much as um, fantasy movie and such. And obviously the idea of magic is pretty broad, and just the stage magician is just the latest incarnation of when we are talking about of magic. And of course talking about what this means in very specific terms is very broad as a result of that, as much as it could be the effect of medicine, it could be telling the future, it could be astrology, it could be turning gold into lead into gold. I mean, whatever you want to say, those things have all been considered some kind of magic. And of course, there was some very early attempts at making sense of magic in our history, mostly because the word magic has been a little bit everywhere as a result of that. One of the biggest culprits for it is the Bible, as it often happens, as we are going to see in this class. Here in this excerpt from Acts 8:9, we have the story of Simon the magician. So in the English Standard Version, there was a man named Simon who had previously practiced magic in a city and amazed the people of Samaria, saying that he himself it was somebody great. They all paid attention to him, from the least to the greatest, saying, "This man is the power of God that is called great." And they paid attention to him because for a long time he had amazed them with his magic. This person is a magician. In a King James version, though, the older version that is the most authoritative these days, at least in the traditional sense of translations, the same Simon, before time in the same city, used sorcery and bewitched the people of Samaria, giving out that himself was some great one, to whom they all gave heed, from the least to the greatest, saying, "This man is the great power of God," and to him he had regard, because of that time he had bewitched them with sorceries. So, bewitched with sorceries, amazed with magic, sorcerer, magician, those two things, it's true today, seem to be a little bit synonymous, and that is the main reason for this idea that sorcery and magic are the same thing. This also goes into the weird, unexplainable things that people can do, and in this case, we have the story of Simon using the power of God, and obviously, God would be your quintessential form of magic. Essentially, whatever amount of power this magical God has would be considered magic in this sense. But more broadly, the idea of magic has followed us along in terms of those translations and in terms of the way in which people have perceived what it is to be a magician. This from Hegel, who is telling us, of course, about the magic that exists outside of its own religion, which is the Christian religion, of course. We shall now discuss the first stage of nature religion, the religion of magic, which we may deem unworthy of the name religion. In order to grasp this standpoint of religion, we must forget all the representations and thought that we are perhaps so familiar with, that themselves belong to the most superficial habits of our culture. We must consider human beings all by themselves upon the earth, the tent of the heavens upon them, and the nature round about them, and so to begin with, without any reflective thought, altogether devoid of consciousness of anything useful. Only on this basis do more worthy concepts of God emerge. Uh, Hegel, probably the single most important philosopher in the 19th century. And of course, in this context, not too fond of magic, but I like his idea that we need to kind of get rid of the weird meanings of what people call magic. And especially for us today, we're going to get rid of it as being opposed to religion, because certainly now we have a very different relationship to these religious forms. In case to make things a little bit more complex, when Hegel is talking about magic here, is using the word Zauberei or Zauberkraft in German, which is usually translated as sorcery. Um, so there's this idea that Hegel points out to these forms of pretending, or these forms speculation that are very much opposed to his idea of philosophy and to his idea of knowledge. And so, in this context, magic and sorcery count as superstition, whereas philosophy would count as the higher forms of knowledge, of course. So the biggest problem that Hegel sees is that magic is kind of this unnatural explanation to the greater mysteries of life, and by giving these kind of basic explanations to mysteries, magic is kind of doing a disservice to humanity. And so we get to the more modern era of science and anthropology, especially. Bronislaw Malinowski is one of the first people to use magic in the context of anthropology, and especially in the context of the people that he meets in Papua New Guinea, especially. This interested nature, again, is obvious if we realize how important is the mythology of magic and how definitely magic clings to the economic concerns of man. In this, however, mythology is far more from a disinterested phenomena than contemplative rhapsody about natural phenomena. Between myth and nature, the two links must be interpolated. Man's pragmatic interest in certain aspects of the outer world and his need of supplementing rational and empirical control of certain phenomena by magic. So, Malinowski, of course, focusing on economy, that is kind of his thing, but he's also focusing on the fact that certainly we can use magic to explain the unexplained parts of magic. We can also use it as a supplemental way to make sense out of magic and the nature around us, the unknown. So, in this context, magic is not just a false explanation, it is a additional explanation. It is a form of science, if you will, scientific explanation based on something that is not the scientific method. So magic becomes especially relevant, as far as Mayakovsky says, because people, when they are met with the unknown, they kind of need to find some kind of a solution. And sometimes that solution is a little bit far-fetched, perhaps in a spell of some sort, perhaps in a ritual of some sort. And all of that we're going to talk about a little bit more this week. So Malinowski definitely has the added edge of understanding a little bit more about psychology and psychiatry, the way that Hegel would not have. And there's certainly a lot of this conversation that has to do with our advances of science, because being able to understand scientific purposes and scientific methods to explain the unexplained is a pretty big part in relegating the realm of magic to kind of a backseat, if you will. E.B. Tyler also told us about magic, and especially in the context of what he called the occult science. So we are still very much in a domain of science, but in a science that is hidden or invisible in some ways. And, this is very appropriate to this conversation of magic for us. The occult and magic have this link. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more this week. In examining the survival of opinions in the midst of conditions of society becoming gradually estranged from them and tending at last to suppress them altogether, much may be learned from the history of one of the most pernicious delusions that ever vexed mankind, the belief in magic. Looking at occult science from this ethnographic standpoint of view, from ethnography point of view, I shall instance some of its branches as illustrating the course of intellectual culture. Its place in history is briefly this: it belongs in its main principle to the lowest known stages of civilization. The lowest races, who have not partaken largely of the education of the world, still maintain it in vigor. So, still within the racist discourse of Tyler, of course, this is not surprising. We have mentioned that very early on in this class. We can set that aside for now, mostly because to him, this is this matter of an elementary form of science. He's talking about this survival of opinions, and essentially, magic is the surviving version of ancient religion. And today, we have, quote unquote, as he sees it, evolved into the larger forms of religion, which have a more, quote unquote, reasonable explanation. Now, whether or not there is actually more reason, this is more of your debate that you can figure out on your own, but it is interesting, especially for us, to keep in mind this linkage between religion and science and the unexplained or the unknown. Most importantly, Taylor is pointing out that magic is something that works in very basic ways, especially what he calls the association of ideas. The principal key to the understanding of occult science is to consider it as based in the association of ideas, a faculty which lies at the very foundation of human reason, but in no small degree of human unreason also. Man, as yet in a low intellectual condition, having come to associate in thought those things which he found by experience to be connected in fact, proceeded erroneously to invert this action and to conclude that association in thought must involve similar connection in reality. He thus attempted to discover, to foretell, and to cause events by means of processes which we can now see to have only an ideal significance. Now, now this is a pretty important contribution from Tyler, because the association of ideas, which allows for the uh, magical process to be meaningful, has to do with this very simple operation of seeing things that have some kind of connection in your mind and some kind of connection in reality. So if we have the possibility within our mind to connect some points which are also more or less connected in the real life, we also have the possibility to affect them. And that is certainly a very important view for the rest of the conversation we'll have about magic, because it works in this very basic ways. And in this context, this analysis is really held true to a certain extent, because a lot of the things that we consider magic today work by this very basic operation of association of ideas. That being said, Edward Fraser is the person who made the most important contribution in taking Tyler to a new level. He noted two principles of magic, and again, those principles are very important for all of the conversations we'll have this week. Number one principle, if we analyze the principles of thought on which magic is based, it will probably be found to resolve themselves into two. First, that it like produces like, or that an effect resembles its cause. And second, that things which have once been in contact and which have each other continue to act on each other at a distance after the physical contact has been severed. The former principle may be called the law of similarity, the latter, the law of contact or contagion. From the first of these principles, namely the law of similarity, the magician infers that he can produce any effect he desires mainly by imitating it. From the second, he infers that whatever he does to a material object will affect equally the person with whom the object was once in contact, whether it formed part of his body or not. Charms based on the law of similarity may be called homeopathic or imitative magic. Charms based on the law of contact or contagion may be called contagious magic. And certainly a lot of this understanding is especially meaningful today in the conversation after COVID-19 and the quote unquote magical ways in which people try to solve the pandemic by contact and, of course, try to limit the contagion of it. So homeopathic medicine is still a word that we are using today, and the principles of homeopathic medicine work on this law of similarity. So the homeopathic medicine contains a natural object or essence of some sort that looks like the kind of effect you're trying to have. So, for example, garlic is a very common form of homeopathic medicine because a clove of garlic looks like a human heart. So, the result of that is that using a garlic clove is a way to improve your heart health. There's no science behind that, although there are some very, very, very basic elemental principles in which there is some kind of meaning behind this. But it starts from the fact that a garlic clove looks like a human heart. Similarly, the law of contact or the law of contagion is a pretty easy one as well, mostly because if you touch something, you are endowed by the magical power of it. So touching the Buddha's belly at the Asian restaurant, or touching the feet of a statue, or touching the tail of the catamount in outside of the library, all of those things are very basic forms of contagious magic. Now, in this very basic sense, of course, there is a much larger consideration to be made about how this is scientifically related, because sympathetic magic has this assumption that in nature there is one event following the other, and of course there is a system of causality that binds all of this. So if you see the world as being all one, all combined, and having some kind of occult tie to all of its other parts, then it is very easy to see how you can just make these small leaps in logic to go from one thing to the other to affect one thing to the other. Now, Fraser says, thus the analogy between magical and the scientific conceptions of the world is close. In both of them, the succession of events is assumed to be perfectly regular and certain, being determined by immutable laws, the operation of which can be foreseen and calculated precisely. The elements of caprice, of chance, and of accident are banished from the course of nature. Both of them open up a seemingly boundless vista of possibilities to him who knows the causes of things and can touch the secret springs that set in motion the vast and intricate mechanisms of the world. Hence, the strong attraction which magic and science alike have exercised on the human mind, hence, the powerful stimulus that both have given to the pursuit of knowledge. They lure the wary inquirer, the footsore seeker, on through the wilderness of disappointment in the present by their endless promises of the future. They take him up to the top of an exceedingly high mountain and show him beyond the dark clouds and rolling mist at his feet a vision of the celestial sky, far off it may be, but radiant with unearthly splendor, bathed in the lights of dreams. Pretty wonderful statement by Fraser in terms of linking magic and science, because it allows you, both magic and science allow you to make sense out of the unknown and perhaps the things that are scary. They have a very specific power, a very specific hold on people, and looking for always more answers in science, always more answers in magic kind of can lead you to this path of believing things that are not necessarily true. And of course, in this case, the more weary you are, the more footsore you are, as he points out, the more disappointed you are in the world and other people and the earthly things, the more likely you are to go to a specific length to find more meaning in life. So there is a certain truth behind all of this that kind of goes to people and their quest for meaning, their quest for making sense of the darkest times.